welcome to the Property Show. I'm Jayashree Kurup. I'm editor at MBTV. We're talking about providing finance to the real estate sector. This is part of a series that we have picked up over the last 2-3 weeks. And discussing it with me is TK Arun, consulting editor, The Economic Times, and Sanjeev Gupta, managing director, NextGen Financial Solutions. Thank you so much for joining me. Arun, I'd like you to set the context. Real estate it has been in the doldrums for a while, and so has the finance for real estate is not becoming any easier. It seems to get more and more complex. So set the context of the problem, the risk, and how there are lots of solutions that people are trying to come up with.
Yeah. Now, we have a situation where in metros and some in prior to towns, large amounts of real estate is actually stuck. There is inventory that is completed, not being sold, inventory that is under construction, inventory that cannot be completed. And the tragedy, the most saddest part of this is that many of these projects are completely viable. They are building assets that this country needs. Look, we are talking about an urbanizing India, where if 50% of the population is to become urban, which any rapidly industrializing, prospering economy has, then you are talking about some 20 to 25 crore people moving from village to town. Where do these people live? We need 20,000 square kilometers of additional urban space. It's a different matter. We don't have a policy for this. But willy-nilly, our construction industry has been working this magic of creating the urban space for urbanization, for people to move in. Now, it is this that has been solved. And why has this projects, which I think are to a large extent completely warranted, valid, and needed by the economy, not being able to be completed? And their non-completion is creating problems for non-banking finance companies, to banks, to the entire financial sector. And it has led to a dearth of jobs. It has led to banks not being able to lend to other businesses, and the entire economy is suffering. Now, the problem essentially is that we don't have a viable means of funding real estate. And this inability to fund real estate, which is actually a market problem, that there is a financing problem. And this financing problem has become a solvency problem for many real estate companies. So a market structure problem is now become an insolvency problem for real estate companies. Now, this is the context. Now, when banks stop getting large amounts of, real estate companies stop getting large amounts of money, even the big ones which actually used to get from banks, they turn to NBFCs. Now, NBFCs were funding them using short-term money. They issue commercial paper, they raise 1 year, 2 year money, and with that money, they lend to real estate. Real estate will actually require money for 5 years, 7 years, 8 years, 10 years. But they keep rolling over these loans. Get some money, take money from buyers, home buyers, then service these loans taken from the NBFCs, and they roll it over. And once one problem with the IL&FS thing happened, one very large NBFC defaulted. Then NBFC stopped being able to issue commercial paper and raise money. And this created a chain reaction. They could not lend to real estate could not do their work, and they stopped repaying loans. So this vicious cycle set in, and the whole problem became much worse. Now, the government has tried to intervene by creating some finance windows for the NBFCs to get money. They said that they'll stand guarantee for part funding some banks to invest in bonds issued by NBFCs as well as small and medium enterprises. And some money has been specifically kept out apart for HFCs and NBFCs. Now, are banks doing this to a full extent? I don't think they are. They have become very cautious, and they are sitting on money which they are happily putting back in the RBI. Instead of utilizing the funds that the RBI has made available to them as additional liquidity, they are just taking this money and putting it back into the RBI and getting 2.75% on their reverse repo deposits. Now, what is the way out of this? Now, this is a question we have to discuss. Now, I have some thoughts, but first I would like to ask Mr. Sanjeev Gupta, who is a practitioner in this field, who has actually lent money, who understands the problems of the sector intimately as a practitioner, from a practitioner's point of view. We'd like to hear him first, and then we can take it forward.
Sure.
Sanjeev ji.
Thank you, Arun. Thank you, Arunji. It's always a pleasure, actually, and of course, today a top honor also to be co-panelist with you. And it's always a pleasure to listen to you, the way you round up the whole thing. It's actually pure education to me. But let me start by saying what you rightly defined, Arunji, is a 12 trillion rupees, 12 lakh crores at stake. And I will define how. You see, there are some 4.6 lakh units which are stalled as of now. And this is not my statement alone. I'm quoting directly from the Honorable Prime Minister's words, which is what she had also set out to set right. And as you rightly said, we'll discuss the solutions later. Let me first bring out, like a doctor maybe, the problem first so that we can all analyze it as we go along. 4.6 lakh units are stalled, which is going to unlock 3.3 lakh crores. So that's one figure. Second, the ones which are slow in moving forward, or laggard as we typically call them, are around 5.76 lakh units. 4.6 lakh crores or 4.6 trillion rupees is the figure there. And the unsold inventory, which what you rightly referred to, is solvent but completely illiquid, is actually that 12 lakh crore figure that I spoke about, the 3.3, 4.6 and 4 trillion rupees, 12 lakh crores at stake. So one of the largest direct stake holding industry. And if I was to just see indirectly, it will probably mind boggle all of us and the people plugged in here, is that the steel, the cement, the construction, the labor, the entire problems of migrant laborers and whatever we are discussing, 80% of that belongs to this sector. The entire segment of I would say the ancillary industries, the sanitary ware, the tiles and everything else, some of who we really deal with on a day-to-day basis, are all actually plugged into the same sector and are facing the heat of this. So that's a very large figure which I'm not able to put a number to. But the biggest challenge that I actually bring to heart, and when I speak, they really reside on the top of my thinking processes, the lenders and the investors in this sector, both of whom have been actually waiting for the last few years to really look at this sector kind of come back. Let me go on to what you asked me to define. What is the root problem of this, all of this that we are discussing? What comes to my mind is the root problem are two. One is not really the viability. The viability comes later, but the first and the foremost thing is the liquidity. And why I'm saying that is, I'll quote a data there as well. The liquidity is the biggest challenge. There is no liquidity. And what is it which is second to none here is the second challenge, is in my opinion, the confidence and the prices which are sagging on a continuous basis. So I'll just quote here to say that on the liquidity, and this is again, I'm quoting a research which I really, really fancy, which says that the debt outstanding or obligated to be repaid on an annualized basis is twice as much as the debt servicing capabilities of the real estate sector at large. And this is some 11,000 housing developers, which a company has surveyed. And it's a reputed company which has surveyed that. Now, the second most important thing that I would like to say is the sagging part of the other thing. So on one hand, this is the challenge. On the other, if you were to get infused with money from the home buyers or whatever, or even if the prices were going up and there was an upward trend, this mobility and the movement of the funds would be there. So again, the problem would get solved. But unfortunately, the prices have fallen by 11% in the Mumbai, I'm just taking a parameter, Mumbai market for that matter, 11% in 2019, and that's after a 5 to 8% fall in the year before. So the compounding is really going on, and I think before that also, Jayashree would be in a better position to comment on that, that there has been a continuous price and the confidence falling. Now, this is also a doing in a certain way of all of us put together in the sector. When I say all of us, I mean all the stakeholders. And I would like to just say that the four main stakeholders, I'll just try to summarize in a moment, is the developer who became a little more greedy and may have put a little risk and sent it off the window to maybe fetch money. Banker, the lender, by actually trying to chase those deals and forgetting that maybe his monitoring should have been of that superior quality, because this is almost a bubbling asset. So that requires a little more monitoring and a little more control. And third, the home and the commercial real estate buyer who almost thought that by investing 5, 7 or 10%, he would actually be gaining 2 times of the 100% value. So he had also put caution to wings. And not to miss out actually the investor, the small, medium and the large investor who came in, provided funds to everyone around, the developers on the side and the private equity funds and the global majors and whatever else, who actually thought that this, what started, would almost last for a lifetime and will go on because the space is something which is limited. That was the concept. So I think in nutshell and summary, that's how I would like to open the comments. And as you rightly said, we'll keep discussing about the solutions and possible answers to various challenges that we are putting forth as we go. Thank you.
I think there's something that here I'd like to intervene. Basically, it's a lack of any kind of system. Like Sanjeev was saying, when you were lending today, for instance, it was not that the builders were violating any norms by taking money from people and buying more land. There was no norm. It was not disallowed. It's disallowed only after RERA came into place. When the only thing I think, and if you were taking money from different sources and not maintaining those books, there was nobody really checking this whole system. There was no entry barrier to becoming a developer. The authorities who were supposed to give the approvals could take anything between 12 to 24 months, 36 months to give approvals, which meant that if you borrowed to buy land, then or you borrowed for development, your costs were escalating even while you were waiting for approvals. So somewhere I think the entire policy system and the approval system had completely collapsed. And the same lender who was lending short-term finance to the project was also giving long-term retail finance to the consumer. He was lending twice over. In many cases, the same lender. In many cases, it was different lenders. But today, when you are trying to sort out the mess, the first lender stands up and says, "What about me?" goes to the IBC. The consumer says, "What about me?" And then finally, when last mile fund comes, they say that we are last in, first out. But the first lender sort of stands there and says, "What about me?" So really, there is a legacy of problems. If we could just break down those problems and see whether there are individual solutions that will work into a whole.
See, there are the structural problems are some of those what you mentioned, but there are some problems that go beyond that. Now, as Sanjeev also remarked, when people invest in the real estate project, they are hoping to make fantastic profit. Now, why did they build up this expectation that the money that you invest in real estate will get you a very high rate of return on the investment? Now, we are used to the idea that there will be perpetual scarcity, shortage in the real estate market. Now, in any normal business, the value that you add is a source of your income, source of your profit. In real estate, if you manage to corner land at a cheap price, then Then appreciation, the value of that land is a major source of your profit. Now, why do we have a scarcity mentality on land? Because there's a real scarcity, and that is completely a result of policy. Urban land is not in short supply. You can convert millions of kilometers of rural land into urban land. Now, many people have asked, how can you actually allow multi-crop fertile land to be converted into urban land? What will happen to our farmers? What will happen to our food security? This is all complete nonsense. The first signs of human civilization, meaning urban settlements, took place in the most fertile deltas of the world, the River Valley Delta, the Euphrates, right, on the banks of the Indus. Wherever land was most fertile, you created civilizations. Cities came up. So, I mean, cities naturally come up when there is a surplus. And the surplus is available when the land is fertile and people can produce surplus out of more than what they need to subsist on. And this has never hindered human progress, nor will it hinder progress now. The productivity of Indian agriculture is so low. I mean, productivity in, say, one part of India would be probably 1/6 of that in Punjab or Haryana. So if you can bring up the average productivity, there is no question of India not being able to feed itself or to even to export large quantities of food. So that's not an issue. So then why do we not allow conversion of rural land into urban land? This is where our political economy kicks in. You have created a system where conversion of rural land to urban land is a way of making money for the political babu class. Now, unless this is fixed and you have a rational policy of zoning, which says that these areas of this state can automatically be converted to urban land just by somebody putting an application and paying a lot of a fee is required, then the scarcity will go. Now, second, now the kind of urban development we create, completely unplanned, without infrastructure, without anything that's whether it's mixed land use or what kind of urban models do we need? What kind of transport do you envisage? What kind of commuting facilities do you want? How green would that be? What is the scope of energy efficiency in the towns that we build, in the settlements we plant, and the way people live? Now, all these questions need to be forethought and then built into your urban planning models. This you haven't done. So the corruption that goes into conversion of rural land into urban land, the corruption that goes into and creates delays in approval processes, these are all things that add on to cost. One builder once told me that roughly 25% of the cost, minimum cost of built up area that he sells actually is on account of various bribes he pays. Now, how can you have a rational market when these are things? Firstly, artificially created scarcity, which builds up expectations of huge returns future to capital gain on the value of the land. Second, rush to buy up land on the part of builders and promoters, project developers, which when an increase in supply sort of foreclose the possibility of that appreciating on the scale that they had hoped for, creates a mad problem for them. Then there's no money to complete the projects they have started. Spread too thin on 3 projects when they have actually raised money for only 1, because they use that money raised for the 1 project to acquire land to start further projects. So industry's problem, stretching themselves too thin in the hope of being able to corner land that will then in turn appreciate in value and therefore pay for whatever little adventurism they have carried out. Now, these are all problems related to policy failures in anticipating demand for land and creating a rational supply of, constant supply of increased urban land. Now, that is all it's the past. Now, unless you correct for this, we won't be able to go forward. Now, happily, there are some corrections happening almost by accident. If you look at Delhi, the national capital region, you allowed Noida to develop. Then you allowed Greater Noida to develop. Now you are Yamuna Development Authority. So these are all ways of augmenting the supply of urban land, right, in a fairly coherent fashion. Unlike in Gurgaon, in UP, in this Noida, Greater Noida, Yamuna area, The government, once it took the land over from the farmers, invested in developing that land, created infrastructure, laid sewerage networks, built roads, laid telephone lines, and then sold it to developers. So it's a sensible thing to do. So this kind of an urbanization we happened now almost accident. Then on the other side, you have Faridabad coming up, now Sonipat coming up. Now you are laying fast connectivity to perhaps Meerut, so that even Meerut becomes part of the large urban agglomeration centered around in Delhi. Now, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, of course we can hear you.
Yeah. Now, so this model we need to take forward. Now, the other question is of financing. Why urbanization is a prime needed economy? The financial system has never realized this as such. It is seen as a high risk lending activity. So financing real estate was seen as something that called for extra risk weightage and extra provision of capital on the part of banks.
Yeah.
So banks weren't too keen to do it from their own books. So you lend to a housing finance company or you lend to a non-banking finance company, which in turn will lend to real estate at a higher rate. Now, this artificially jacked up the cost of finance that real estate developers are able to access, and ultimately went into raising the cost of the projects they built. This again is something we need to rethink. Now, building a real estate project is not as long gestation or as risky as building a road or building a very large airport or a port or something like that. They will pay for themselves in probably 15, 20 years. But even these requires 7 to 10 year money. Now, the ideal way to raise 7 to 10 year money is by issuing bonds. But we unfortunately don't have a functional market for corporate bonds. The bonds that are sold are mostly government bonds. Even when you say that we have a market for securitized mortgages, these are not really a traded market. You securitize a mortgage and sell these securities to somebody who will buy and keep them till maturity. Now, that's not a bond market. That's not the way to do these things. Now, every bit of these things need to change. Only then you will have viable financing of real estate, and we'll be able to get out from the kind of problems we have today.
My contention is that RERA, and Sanjeev, I'm going to come to you here. RERA has been a watershed of sorts. At least in a completely unstructured system, RERA brought some structure into the system. The future, if I may say so, is sorted as far as we're taking out consumers' money and putting it into other users. At least that has been curbed. And also, I think because of RERA, a lot of developers have started managing books, which was never done. I mean, historically, it was never done. Very few did it. But the legacy of the past, the burden of the past, and the fact that the past was very risky is what we are carrying forward. Now, clearly, we increased the risk weightage of real estate to 150, brought it to 125, brought it to 100. There is some intent to make it bankable, but it still doesn't seem to resonate with the lenders. What does it take to for lenders to understand that real estate risk is there because, and it is something that you can manage, and is it manageable at all?
I think very important, very, very important point. And I would like to start it from here. You see, what does the lender do? Let me start from there. When it lends money, it actually provides it like a capital, which is going to bear an interest. So what is it looking for? The lender is looking for returns of capital in the form of principal being repaid and returns on capital, that is the interest being paid regularly. Now, this on theory is very good. Why is it happening and why is it not happening? Let's analyze it for a moment. Now, till the time the developer is actually developing the project, and look at the dichotomy of the situation that the same lenders are like an ocean where almost 52% of their own money goes into these NBFCs, which do the last mile funding for the retailers who are actually the buyers, and in some ways the money comes through them back into the system. So suppose for a moment this money gets stuck somewhere. That's where the challenges start. Now, if the developer has built the project and it is not getting off taken, that's what starts choking the system. And that's what starts actually increasing the risk for any lender for that matter. Now, why is that happening? I think we discussed that in the opening perspective, that if I have most of the buyers of residential and commercial real estate have been the people who are looking either for rental income or for a resale. They were expecting a very marginal percentage to be invested, and this was happening. It was a cycle which was moving too fast, and a capital machine had been formed. So that could not be sustained because of certain things that happened in the economy. We wanted to correct the economy, so that's what caused the impact. But let's discuss the outcome. So if I'm not getting my returns on capital and my returns off capital, the way risk increases, and then I start putting barriers to this flow of money. Now, one thing that is very, very serious when and if it happens is something like called an NPA, the non-performing asset, which means whether the developer project is good or bad, my amount of debt that I have provided as a debt is an asset for me, and that's what, when it does not perform, I have to treat it like a non-performing asset when I am a lender. To this lender, this NPA is very challenging, and he cannot any longer lend to that organization, institution, promoter, led companies, and things of this kind. Now, as more and more of this was happening, that is what was causing this lender to almost constrain itself from lending to, irrespective whether the risk dosages were coming down or not. Even when they were going up, they were increasing their lending, but more and more when it came down, their actual lending got constrained. Now, I would like to take you down to Thursday, the 7th November 2019 for a moment here, when I think not all of us, not the developers alone, but the capital market celebrated a fantastic capital market product, which was created by the Honorable Finance Minister in the name of an alternative investment fund for real estate. And it was supposed to be a very well designed product. In fact, it was. And the next day, the stock markets on real estate sector, after a very long time, really zoomed. So what was the product? It was an AIF which was supposed to basically at the core, I'll first touch the core and then around that. At the core, it was to address this non-performing asset problem and the insolvency problem in the real estate, which the bankers were unable to handle. Why? They were unable to lend to them because of the systematic challenges which RBI and everyone cautions banks on. So once this is ring-fenced into an alternative investment fund, which is not any longer regulated directly by RBI, but is in the domain of SEBI. And it is structured in a manner. So this one was directly structured to address three things: to actually bail out projects, and I will define which ones, to support the ones which were viable, and to provide funds to this segment which I'm talking about, the NPA and the insolvency in the lying in the courts and others. And last but not the least, actually aid the lenders which were strangulated into this, both the banks and the NBFCs of the country. So bailout was to the stalled projects and also the ones which were medium and affordable housing segment. Support was to the viable projects of the country, and the funds were to be provided for these and what I've already described, the lenders of the country. Now, what was at stake was these. So 25,000 crores was allocated out of which the government of India allocated directly 10,000 crores, and the balance 15,000 crores was to be from the kitty of SBI and LIC. Now, if this piece was to flow into the system, I am just quoting a number to say that it would have unlocked the lakhs of crores that we were initially discussed back into the banking sector. And if that was to happen, this money would go back then to the retail segment, and through the retail segment back into the confidence building. And not only would this real estate segment be vibrant once again, but as an investment class, come into the center stage back and prosper the entire industries around it as also probably a more vibrant Indian economy. That is what was the core of this thinking. So one of the key solutions I have really been banking upon is this. And I think that could have actually solved a lot of problems. So I will say this much and then invite you to.
Arun, where are we stuck in this? The AIF should have had the risk-taking appetite. The AIF should have had been able to actually lend to projects that were stuck, but had to come unstuck if the money had to come back. Why didn't this take off? What is your view?
So the AIF actually proposed to lend money to projects that were in a reasonably good health, which were AAA rated. Now, why would such projects need money from the AIF? They can take money from the bank. The AIF should have been more liberal, more inclusive in the nature of the projects that it was willing to fund. That did not really happen. And I don't know how much money has actually been lent out of it.
750 to 1,000 crore. Out of 25,000 crore, we haven't given out more than 1,000 crore.
Yeah. So that is the problem. So they should have aggressively lent out more. But there is also one other issue. Now, if a project is stuck, it has built up large interest obligations, which runs the possibility of making it unviable. With what guarantee can a bank actually lend to it? Now, we have this insolvency and bankruptcy code, which provides a framework for making viable projects out of unviable projects by reducing the cost, by taking a haircut. The entire project cost is taking a haircut. So to my mind, the ideal solution is not actually AIF, but a buyout of many of these projects by some large entity, a buyout fund. It could be a special purpose vehicle created by the government. It could be a private equity arm. It could be anybody. It could be a separate SPV created by the banks themselves. You need to buy these projects out at a much lower cost. Okay, the banks will initially take a hit. Some of the promoters will lose their shirt, and the equity will be written down to zero, and they'll have to hand over the projects. But once it is relieved of this excess cost, then these projects will become viable, and they will be once rid of this need to service debt, which is no longer in a position to service. They will be able to be completed. Then the entire process that you talked about of being sold to people, the liquidity being unlocked, the money coming back into circulation, all this will happen. But that hasn't happened. Nobody has set up a fund to buy out these stuck projects and complete them, except in the case of a few things like JP, where the Supreme Court has intervened and asked the NBCC
Where are we with that? Where are we with that? 2 years down the line, we are still trying to negotiate how to get the money to start. The money is there. 25,000 crores is not a small amount. It is enough to get the, actually in real estate, you just need to get the cycle moving. If you put that much money, you start, say, one tower, finish a tower, the remaining, let's assume 10, 20 units are put for sale in the market, completed apartments of good viability among buyers. That money put into the next, it's if you allowed it to fester for 10, 12 years, just another 2 years to get it out of the problem was not such a big deal. But somehow that first last mile lending to kickstart one phase of the project so that that cycle of finance comes, consumer payments start, the vendor payments go out, the project takes off, and there is a issue of positivity. Other than some rares and maybe one or two IRPs that I've seen, which have told the consumers, look, nothing else is moving, you build it yourself, we'll help you in this. I don't see any structured effort to start projects. You have to start the real estate industry again. And that's where this conversation is headed. What I really want to understand from both of you, you both have immense experience. What is that financial masala that will start the real estate industry again? If it doesn't, the banks are going to go under as much as the real estate industry because their exposure is huge. How much NPA can you hold?
Yeah, see, it's not just banks. We think of bank as one entity that is its interest at heart, which will act rationally and try to salvage the system. A bank is actually one senior bank manager who is a CMD who wants to retire without a severe case being charged against him, without being criminalized for completely innocuous, harmless decisions taken. So if you build up a climate of insecurity on your professional banker, many of them have been sent to jail. Many of them have newspaper stories written about them on being suspected of corruption. Who wants to take all this risk? So you let things pass. You just wait it out. You don't want to take a chance and be accused of doing anything. So many bankers have failed to act because we have very skewed incentive system among public sector banks. You do something positive, you take a risk and take a decision, you might end up in jail. If you do nothing, you are rewarded by a quiet retirement and a handsome pension and board members in various companies that you helped some 10, 15 years ago. So why will a banker take a risk and take a decision to save the system? So this hasn't been addressed. Banking system, if you leave one crucial part unaddressed, the system will not move. This part where the fear of being stamped a criminal still weighs down upon our senior bank. And that is something that prevents them from taking bold decisions.
Is this what holds the lenders back, Sanjeev? Is there any part of this lending system that can actually step up and say, look, I can take 10 projects, do this lending, but these are the norms? See, as a lender, you can lay down the norms, but somehow lenders were very happy colluding with the system rather than laying down that regulatory norms, which could have avoided this mess. Sanjeev?
So I think the lenders have done the best that they could have. You see, what happens is you do have very strong policies and framework, but when the heat is on, the speed and the heat itself takes over, and you are dispersing it more in the flow. So the money gets moved out into the system. And then sooner or later, you try to control with the range. So this is exactly what is happening even right now. Let me tell you that I'll just take you back again into where I left. The Honorable Finance Minister wanted that by March 2020, this money, if it goes into the system, which is what she desired, that if this 25,000 crores goes into the system, there would be a very vibrant sector and very vibrant economy alongside. In February 2020, there was not much time though, but in February 2020, Mr. Arun Mehta, the managing director of SBI Capital Venture Funds, he's gone on record to say that they have already done a capital commitment of 540 crores out of this. It's a very good start, but by no means comparable to what the system or the government would have desired to kind of achieve. He has very ambitious targets in which he wants to target an impact of 50,000 units, impacting around 2.4 lakh people, which is worth wishing him the luck and the best wishes for, because that's what is required in the system. And I think one very clear thing is that at this point of time, the lenders will need support. All of them are looking at very strongly this system to work. So what is happening is that some bit of money has been planned to go from here back to the lenders also. So once that capital comes back with return, maybe on capital, even if not return, at least the principal, it could again flow back into the system. Because try and understand what happens is till the time you're not getting your money paid back, the RBI norms are such that it allows a sectoral cap not to be breached. So they cannot breach it unless the money rotation comes back. So that's one thing which is very importantly required. So this fund really has to kick off, and I think we can all wish SBI, which is the fund manager, the best of luck and the best of speed to take it forward. The second most important thing here is that while all this is happening, they're even keeping, the fund itself is saying that we will keep our returns of both the principal invested and the returns thereupon, both the principal as well as the returns, till the end. So making the whole system vibrant is their key objective. And I would only say that the industry should go hand in hand with all such efforts to make sure that this time around, the health of the sector is the first and the foremost thing. So all stakeholders will have to work back to strengthen this system. And I would typically request government, state governments, large, I would say the real estate companies, to pool in their resources to think about some more of these debt and equity funds, allowing the whole sector to actually emulate this model which the Ministry of Finance has already put in for the country at large, to really get this going, so that the benefit of this is not only in, see, any time that anyone puts, say, 10 rupees into a fund, typically 5 times or 6 times or going up to 10 times if the credibility is high, you are able to raise from the national and the international capital market. The global capital markets provide you that pool of money. So as you go along, build credibility, this will keep increasing.
But you're not going along. 1,000 crores out of 25,000 crores is not going along. The fact is that there is 25,000 crores allocated. It was supposed to be last mile funding. If just, let's take the 3 big elephants in the room, Unitech, Amrapali, and JP. If the money, and that is lakhs of consumers, if over 1.5 lakh consumers, if you just take these 3 and set the ball rolling, a large part of the confidence that had eroded would have come back. You've got the Supreme Court there. You've got the RERA standing there. You've got proper monitoring of these 3 big groups, but you're not seeing the funds coming out. And today's conversation actually is, why aren't these funds coming out, especially when there are regulators standing there? With the Supreme Court, with the RERA, the risk perception should have lightened. Why doesn't it lighten? So while we say it's good to say we wish them luck, I think they need more than luck. They need the gall to step forward and do something. And that's where I think this conversation has to move, because that's the only way that we will be, you have to take the bull by the horns. There's money here, there's a problem here, the two have to match. Arun, do you agree?
Yeah, let me just ask Sanjeev this question. So you run an NBFC. Suppose you were asked to give money, give a loan to any one of these projects, Unitech, JP, Amrapali. What would be your reaction? What are the concerns that you will have? What will prevent you from lending money to these projects?
No, so besides, understanding the risk on each project side and trying to mitigate them, I think nothing should, if you ask me honestly. And if I was to do a fund structure, this is what, you see, and while I really appreciate Jayashree's impatience, I would say we cannot forget that November to February and March itself actually absorbed into almost like the COVID situation. So this was hardly a 3 or 4 month period as of now. So the test, I would say the pudding, the taste of the pudding probably lies in a sample, in its tasting. So that's happened, and I think we are moving forward. But nothing will stop me from lending, because the risks are very clearly identified today. We are at the lowest ebb of the I would say the risk curve today. We know everything now. Everything is priced in. The only thing is now, if you were to be able to support this. And if you have a proper structure which is both debt and equity, so you are getting your returns and you have a profit piece, which typically a fund does. So you can really move up the curve. And I think that's what I'm sure that is why the Honorable Finance Minister thought through, approved, endorsed, and gave a commitment of 10,000 crores to a structure like this. So I think that's what is the need of the hour. And that's what anybody will pursue.
There is
recommend here.
Sorry.
Jayashree, recommend here.
Yes.
Now, why would any lender want to lend to a project which has accumulated costs by not servicing its loans over years? So they have accumulated penalties, accumulated interest upon interest. So the final cost of the project has become so high that it is no longer viable as a project to be financed, where returns are to be and investments will be recouped from the same set of assets that have to be sold ultimately. Now, unless you cut off these excess layers of cost that has accumulated over the period of dysfunction, how can this project become viable? And what is the mechanism for removing these additional layers of cost, except an insolvency or a buyout?
So Arun, I'll take a moment here, and you rightly said, in any project financing at whatever stage, and specifically when it is really, I would say, on an NPA or an insolvency situation, we as financiers calculate something called sustainable debt. As you are rightly pointing out, some of these real estate projects could actually be beyond the capacity of repayment. But if there is some cash flow which is to come back still, which is what the situation in most of the projects that you are describing, and if I was able to hold the charge on that, then if I was to lend some portion and be sure that I will capture this, and if I take all the rights there, which is possible, then I would be able to get this piece out, which is, let's say, the money that I'm putting in now, to get this larger money out. If suppose the money that I'm investing is less than the money that I was possible to get back, even after my due diligence, I think that's where you are calling typically the unviable projects. These are unviable on liquidity side, but most of the projects that we are thinking of are lacking security, yes. Shortfall in security, yes. But the basic challenge is the promoter's commitment to make sure that now they are ready to deliver the projects, get that money out, they're ready to allow this piece of capital to come in. It will be a little extra cost, but it is required to make the whole system liquid and go through once again, and including their own reputations.
I think
that's what is the key, in my opinion, to checking out on the liquidity side, cash to cash, whether this piece of going in versus what's coming out, if that allows my return of capital and returns on capital to happen, I think it can be financed. That's the way I look at it.
I think
Other than that, the promoter support is required. That's about it.
No, there is one more stakeholder that you've forgotten, the home buyer, who has been servicing his debt for so many years, 10, 12, 15 years without getting the home. And today, the sad part is that the guy who did not default is going to default. Why? Because he hasn't got the house. His bankability is finished. Many of them are retiring. Many of them have lost jobs, their salary cuts and things like that. And if you look at what happened in the JP case, why did they become secured creditors? Because as a body of lenders, they were bigger than any other lender. And those people, if you don't take them into account, and today they are at breaking point. The consumer today is at breaking point. The one person who has always serviced his debt to the lender, to the developer, he's scared, everything, he has defaulted. Many of them have defaulted. And the kind of defaults I've seen in the last 6 months, I haven't seen in the last so many years. When the one secured lender defaults in this system, you will have to take cognizance of the fact that it is a question of complete that project now or the whatever was, you're saying the consumer receivables have to come, they will not come because the consumer can't pay, because he's not bankable. The bank is not going to lend even retail finance. This is a actual problem here
This is right.
that somebody has to address.
Has to break it.
Yes.
And this breakability can come in only from somebody who's not really doing a debt product. He has to do a quasi-debt, quasi-equity product, which is typically the function of the alternative investment funds or the private equity funds called in the Western world. In India, we call it the alternative investment fund. World over also, it is called the alternative investment fund, but more so now in India. So I think that's what I see typically as the most emergent solution.
And the speed that you need, there's money there. But I'm not impatient. I'm only a commentator. The guy who's impatient is the guy who's waited for 12 long years, and he spent his pension money, a large part of his earnings into something that was just sunk into nothingness. Unless that gets delivered, and that's where the crisis is today. And I think the RERAs are aware of it. There are some of the regulators who are aware of it, but somehow the finance mechanism is not taking cognizance of the fact that you need to move with speed. Otherwise, all lending to the sector, formal lending to the sector, may be impacted, especially post-COVID. Arun?
Yeah. See, the incentives for different players in this segment are different.
Yeah.
They haven't converged. For the people in the finance system, as Sanjeev said, if the money you put in can be made profitable from the income stream that is still visible from that project, it's okay, you will lend. But suppose it is not, and it might be, but suppose there is no guarantee that will happen, then why should he take the risk? What is in it for him?
Right.
So his incentive is not aligned to that of completing the project. His incentive is perhaps to do nothing and retire.
But you're talking about the individual banker.
The individual banker.
Yeah.
Now, unless there is strong political will to make all these interests converge, nothing will move. So what is really missing is actually somebody exhibiting the political will to make the system work. This has to happen. These people who have borrowed their money, and ultimately when they default, it is again the same bank's money which is going to be stuck. The banks that have lent to real estate, or collectively the banks have lent to real estate, and they have lent to the consumer finance home buyer, who are in turn given the money to real estate projects. So when there is project gets stuck, the bank loses money from both sides ultimately.
Yes.
And so it is in the bank's own interest to get these projects moving and to recover the money, both from the developer and from the individual home loan taker. Now, but that is in the bank's interest. But is it in the banker's interest? You don't know. So there, only the government can stand guarantee that a banker takes a decision in good faith. It will not lead to any criminal charges. Now, the government has been saying, but who decides whether he took the decision in good faith or not? Now, so this still question hangs in the air. Until that is resolved, nobody will take a risk.
Sanjeev, do you think there is any way? This is music to my ears, actually. This is exactly what really needs to be done. Allow the banker to take that risk, because why is it a risk? Because you've assigned a risk to it. You've assigned a very high risk to real estate. And the banker has historically seen that it can go from 100 to 150% and back again, depending on the mood of the government. So what he's doing is long-term lending, right? And he has to make sure that he is covered. He retires peacefully, like Arun said. But the point is that what is that one thing, that one statement that has to come from the political? I think the political bigwigs are in the right frame of mind to make those statements. They have shown time and again that they do want to see a resolution of this problem. What is that one thing that will make the banker think that he can take that risk?
So let me say this, and I was saving this as almost the last comment, that what we are discussing and describing is called the credit enhancement or the first loss guarantee. Now, what it means is that when the lender provides the money, there is somebody who comes in and says, okay, you will not lose the money because I will provide the credit enhancement. And government is doing it similar thing for the MSME sector. They could use some of the leading infrastructure finance companies or some specific vehicle through HUDCO and many others. LIC could come in place and do something similar to create a credit enhancement vehicle such that it provides this credit enhancement, which allows the banker to take a decision on the basis of mitigating the risk, which Arunji just described. That, if they were to be able to mitigate this risk, that in case the cash flows fall short, then I would, as a lender, still get my money back in spite of my taking that extra risk, because somebody is holding the first loss guarantee to the whole thing. So that piece can be brought in, and I really would like to use Arunji's comment there to say that that can be backed by only by a political will to this. Of course, with your channels reach and your the industry reach, we could actually make a policy advocacy case that the government should understand that if this piece was put in, then we will probably get a lot of money moving back into the system, which will actually unlock the money for the banks and institutions at large and put it back into productive use.
Why would why would that fund take that risk? I mean, what is the driver for them?
So credit enhancement is a piece which is actually globally something which is being put to work largely where projects need to be supported such that, in the last mile funding and where sustainability or cash flows have really become a question mark, and in the interest of the economies to be revived and in the interest of the projects to be actually catalyzed, typical situation as it prevails in the real estate sector today, credit enhancement has worked to advantage of bringing the confidence back, which is where we started from, and the liquidity back into the system. So along with this AIF, credit enhancement can be an additional tool to really mitigate the risks that we are discussing.
The UP RERA did a study when it was looking at the mess in its market, the Greater Noida market. And what the chairman said is that about 25% of projects don't have any juice in them. They will have to be supported. Another about 25% of projects are such that with a small little infusion of funds, it can actually take off because there's so much viability in that project. If the developer himself completes, so be it. If you have to bring another project manager, so be it. But those 25% of projects can be completed. Another 50% of projects are cash flow positive projects. Either they have more unsold units, or they have excess land which can be monetized and used. The thing is that it's not gloom and doom. It's only 25% out of the 100% that really needs serious support. About 75% of projects are viable. What needs to be done is a assessment and a credit assessment of these projects, which many people have done. But the creditors and the lenders are not looking at that changing risk profile. Arun?
Yeah. So who can make the lenders lend? Ultimately, it is the government. If it is clear that 75% of projects can be completed with a little bit of money, then supplying that money should not become one-way ticket to jail. There should be no risk of that. Then bankers will lend. If the government says that it is okay to lend to these projects, they will lend. So that comfort plus the will that these projects should be completed on the part of the government will actually get them completed. That is what is missing.
Sanjeev?
Yeah, so I think I will say this, that the large solution lies in actually the lender really getting some kind of a support here. So what you rightly said, that the difference is one which is viable and illiquid, and the other is which is non-viable and non-liquid. So I think even if we were to separate the men from the boys, it would be, the entire problem or the major problem solved, because the ones which are viable and illiquid can actually be funded immediately. And I think for that, the mechanism is in place. The intent and maybe the speed needs to be aggravated a little. And I think the solution seems to be in place. Of course, what we are also trying to recommend here, probably, if we all agree, is that maybe a credit enhancement tool could further solve the problem. So that could be also maybe advocated to the government. That's what I feel.
And I'm going to bring this conversation back to where we started, NBFCs and HFCs, additional liquidity to NBFCs and HFCs. Do you see this becoming a reality? Do you see this pulling the industry out of the red?
So I think it can be done. I mean, there are these special windows that the government has created for banks to invest in bonds issued by housing finance companies and NBFCs. And there's no reason why, when it is guaranteed by the government, banks should not lend. They should lend. They should invest in the bonds paper issued by these companies. Now, see, the thing is that this is for the little bit of money that is guaranteed by the government. But the requirements are in hundreds of thousands of crores, right? Lakhs of crores. Now, that money cannot be guaranteed by the government. That can only be done by a viable corporate bond market. So, to have a corporate bond market, you need buyers and sellers, and you need an entire range of mechanisms to hedge against risk. There is interest rate risk, there is credit risk, there is even an exchange rate risk implicit in even a rupee loan. Now, all these risks can be hedged against through market mechanisms, through a variety of derivatives and credit wall swaps and so on and so forth. So we have some of these already available, but they are still very underdeveloped and stunted in their development. We have extensive stamp duties which have recently been brought down to allow securities to be registered at a very efficient price. Then we have this securities transaction tax, which is inimical to the functioning of a proper bond market. That needs to go. So once you have a functional, viable bond market, then this all these NBFCs and housing finance companies will be able to raise money from the bond market. People are desperate for an instrument that will give them a decent rate of return. Your bank is giving you some 2.75% in your savings bank, and probably 5%, 6% in your fixed deposits. So these are no longer seen as attractive saving pools by common public. So if there is a viable bond market, you can actually afford to take a risk. Put 10% of your money in these risky bonds, another 10% in, or 20%, 30% in less risky bonds, and some in completely stable government bonds, and some in security, whatever. So one such diversification of asset portfolio opens up as an opportunity. People will buy these kind of bonds. So we need to create an ecosystem of a viable bond market.
Sanjeev, you want to comment?
Yeah, two points I would like to make here. One, I think on the, let me first complete what narrative T.K. Arunji has started, is that on the bond market, one of the biggest impacts, if you really want Indian bond market to come to the center stage, and one of the strongest ways of doing that, and the best time for doing that is today almost. You see, the savings rate is going down. I will quote again SBI chairman, who went on record to say that 2.5 lakh crores to 3 lakh crores of unutilized money is lying with that bank alone, where he's looking for credible borrowers. So shows the kind of liquidity overhang that's there in the system, but we are not getting credible off-takers. Here, it's very important to revive the bond market and bring it to center stage. And a very if we really mean that, then one of the policy measure I could recommend is actually allowing for next maybe 2 years initially, and then we could review it, the long-term capital gain to be relaxed for investment in the bond market, such that if it is to be sold after 1 year or something, that could really bring a lot of pull into the market, and the attractiveness could increase because it really gives the returns a fillip. Second, I think somehow again, the credibility of the bonds issued in real estate will have to be restored, which I think is happened. And that's why I'm saying the time is right for this. The rating agencies have actually been, really come up to the mark that SEBI and RBI both have desired them to be, though they are regulated by SEBI. But RBI has done a lot to actually make sure that the rating agencies are no longer seen lightly. So this is actually very essential that the rating can be relied upon in the bond market. And again, I come back to innovative thought processes where the rating of the bonds itself will have to be upped and improved upon, so that the paper can then float with a lot of confidence. So I think the other thing that I would like to suggest is that very clearly, wherever the developers feel that they are not really able to, kind of take the project forward, they should try, even if it takes some of their better projects to be sold, brought money, because that's what business is all about. And probably they are waiting for some kind of forbearance to come from the government. And you see, the system is in such a manner that wherever it's not viable, the lender is not going to be able to come through and help you out. So the promoters will have to help themselves a little also. The business is all about this, making money somewhere and putting money back. So I think they should also have a relook at that, bring money, try and complete the project, deliver, and look for the next one, maybe to improve upon their profit. The times are such, and I think that is what is the need of the hour.
We spent a lot of time, but I think there is one more issue that I would like to raise, taking off from what Sanjeev said. Then the developer needs more skin in the game. Our entire real estate system was 10 to 25% the real estate developer bought. There were some funds that came from the lenders, but about 50% of the fund needed to come from the consumers. When the consumer funding stops, the entire industry implodes. And you need some kind of a financial closure with, say, 10%, 20%, 30% of consumer inflows. Can projects be completed? If the projects can't be completed, like Sanjeev says, you'll have to think of liquidating your assets, maybe your land, something like that, and bring the money back. But unless the developer puts more skin in the game, the lenders, I don't think, have the appetite to bring more funds into the system. And that's my reading of the market. The lenders feel that the developer has taken out more than he has put in, and there's not enough skin in the game. Arun?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think the changes in regulation, the RERA, plus the changes in the accounting norms, will put an end to heavy dependence on the home buyers giving that advance as a primary source of financing the company. The new accounting norms have something to do with recognizing this as income. And even if you have received some part of the money, it will not be shown as the project's income. And they'll have a problem should be showing viability, financial viability, without bringing in their own capital to a much larger extent than used to happen in the past. This again, the reason why promoters did this was that they were seen as a very risky venture, and they did not have access to bank funds. And once that liquidity constraint is eased, they will need to rely less on home loan advances from the home buyers. So this is another systemic corrective that has been made. Real estate must become like any business, where the profits depend upon the value you add, not from speculating on capital gains and land. And shortchanging the consumer and being able to spread yourself too thin by taking on more projects than you actually wanted. I think some of the systemic correctness are in place, but the question is, how do you move from where you are to the new, healthier system that is emerging? So I think many of these real estate companies that are now not in a position to complete their projects need to be bought out by another entity, their capital right size, and then the construction completed. I think that is a step that only the government can organize. Even if the government doesn't need to do it itself.
That's of course that's one of the solutions, and the government I think is seriously thinking in terms of that, but the industry itself is seeing consolidation. The non-serious players have sold out or have given away to more serious players, and there is some amount of consolidation that's happened, but this very tight liquidity position is actually really detrimental to a industry that is capital intensive. While it's constructing, it needs to.
Yeah, could I just make it one additional element?
Yeah.
After the migrant crisis, the government has said that they will build rental housing.
Yes.
Publicly funded rental housing.
Yes.
So this is very crucial. Yeah. Now, in a country like India, to carry on with the slogan housing for all is 100% stupid. We are a country of migrants. Even if I have a home in my native village, I need a place to stay when I migrate to the city.
Absolutely.
So housing for all is has to be completely redefined or abandoned. You need plentiful supply of housing so that you can rent a home at an affordable rate.
Yeah.
So that is plentiful supply of affordable housing is what is required, not housing for all. Yeah. Now, once you focus on that, then actually many things will get corrected. Today, the rent that is available is hardly 2% of the capital cost.
Yeah.
So the annual rent of a property is works out to only 2%. Then again, you're what are you banking on? You're banking on some capital appreciation in the future.
That's right.
So once you start building property for rental income, then your prices have to correct to a level where the rental income is more than justifies investment in real estate as compared to investing in some other sector, right, where you have an average rate of return. So this, I think, is another corrective that is on its way, but is still not in place.
It's a long way off, because even now it is going to be 1.5% to 2%, max 3%. Yeah. But I think in the affordable rental housing scheme, what the government has done is it has sweetened the deal. It has said that if you finish if you use technology to finish in 18 months, you get a 10% of the cost is infused into your project. If you don't have GST, you don't have stamp duty, these take the pain out of that, and it improves the viability of the project. So I think somewhere solutions are being sought, and that's why I thought it's so critical to have this discussion with people like you, who can actually come up with solutions that the governments can listen to. And Sanjeev, closing remarks from you? Can't hear you. You're mute.
I'm so sorry. To me, I think it remains a very essential, very critical, and the most sunrise sector, on the basis of which the Indian economy has to ride to the next level. And I think the lenders, the investors, funds, the credit enhancement, and the stakeholders, which is included the developers, the property buyers, both residential and commercial, rating agencies, everyone put together, all of us have to make sure that we bring back two things, the liquidity and credibility. So I think if both of these are in sight somehow, then I think we are on the winning path. And I really think that the government is focused there. We all need to also align ourselves. If the government is somewhere not able to think through the best of the solutions at times because of multiplicity of things, we are duty bound to bring it to their attention. And I think through this discussion also, we are trying to do that. Maybe all succeed in that. But at the end of this, it's so critical to the growth of this economy itself that without this, neither the lenders nor the investors and nor the rest of the industry are going to go places. So I think very, very essential to do what we are doing and take it forward. And I see a great sunshine ahead.
To all the people who have been posting queries, I just have to say that there was not enough time to pick up the queries, but I have tried to take the essence of whatever you have put into the conversation so that we could get both the experts to talk about it. Arun, closing remarks from you, please.
Yeah. So I will possibly echo the sentiment Sanjeev raised. This is required by the economy. This is required, as I said, no prosperous economy has stuck at 32% urbanization. We have to urbanize 50-60%. China is now 60% urban. And once we do that, we need more and more real estate. We need better urban planning, and we need finance. Now we are far away from having all these things properly in place, but we are making small steps, baby steps forward. So many people who have been, as you said, who have invested in property during this period are bearing the pain of this transition. I hope the government will realize the pain and act to give them the houses they have paid for. And only political will to set in motion the few things we have discussed will actually complete these projects and make these houses available. And other structural changes are required, whether it's a debt market or buyout funds that will buy these projects, stall projects out and complete them. Again, these are things which are creatures of policy. So it is again governmental action that we are looking forward to.
Arun, there's a technical problem. I can't hear you. Could you repeat what you said? There was a small.
I said all the other ingredients of the needed solution, whether it is a debt market, whether it's a buyout funds that will actually buy out stall projects and complete them, they're correcting their capital costs in the process. All these are again creatures of policy. So it is again a policy that we are looking forward to correct these problems.
Thank you so much, both of you, for joining me. The conversation is still open. I don't think we've reached anywhere. We've just given some solutions. We are hoping that these solutions are the corridors of power are listening to these, because we need solutions and we need them fast. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jayashree. Thank you, Arun.
Thank you, Sanjay.